Hey, it's me, Medium Mac, here with a story about making necklaces. A little backstory, I like to make Christmas presents for my friends back home. It started when I went to the #1 school in innovation. There we had the Innovation Hub, a fantastic workspace which had 3D printers, laser cutters, drill presses, and a bunch of tools that I never got to use before college. So to teach myself to use all these, I decided to be Santa as a hobby. This tradition held, but this last year presented some new problems. First, I graduated, which isn't really a big deal. Alumni can use the Innovation Hub. But then I moved for my job, and that's inconvenient because it's a 2-hour drive, but I can handle that. And then the pandemic hit, and I couldn't really do anything about that. So I decided to make stuff with things that I have lying around the house, like 24 soda cans, a pair of folding gloves, and the aluminum furnace from the 2013 King of Random video. But what should I make? Well, the friend that I wanted to make a present for is an artist, and also the game master for a tabletop RPG that we play on Discord. She's made a cool world with different factions that each have their own symbols and traditions, and I thought that taking these symbols would be a good way to get around the fact that I don't have any skill in art, and casting them out of metal would be a great way to embrace the fact that I have no skill in metalwork. Not having any skill in metalwork, I managed to screw it up and not be able to fix my mistakes by the time I got home. But luckily I had a backup plan. When I can't give a friend a meaningful present, I decide to instead give a curse. I think it's funny, and I found an appropriately disturbing scatological children's toy. Not sure why this thing exists. Maybe there was a market for it? I'm not sure though. I don't want to distribute conspiracy theories, but I think there's an alternative motive for this thing existing. She hated it, which is the intent really, and when I got back, I decided to resume work on the intended present. And that's the story of this video, so let's get started and look at our team. Having studied engineering, I know that the first step for any project is computer-aided design. For this, I just took the symbols and imported them to Inkscape. This let me turn them into vector files. Turns out the program Blender can just take a vector file and turn it into a mesh, which is pretty rad. With that, I 3D printed this. This is a set of negatives, and also where everything started to go wrong. The intent was to pour paraffin into here to make some wax positives. I thought paraffin would solidify and then you just knock it out of the mold. Doesn't work that way, so I then put in some pieces of yarn to try to act as pull tabs. If there are any questions about the safety of dealing with hot wax, I don't have any safety tips. All I can say is that I've kind of grown used to burning myself. And then when that didn't work, I experimented a bit. Once you're done pouring your wax, you can go ahead and put it in any commercial fridge. And we'll leave it there for 30 minutes or so. When cooling it down didn't solidify the paraffin enough, I tried putting it in the oven. Hopefully that would melt the point of contact between the negative and the positive and let me pull it right out. This worked once or twice, but it was time for a new design. I don't know how I got this stupid. Unrelated, I like to drink my glue through a wine glass. The curvature really focuses the fumes. Obviously, the wax is just going to leak right out of the edges of this, and it did. Finally, I arrived at the obvious solution, which is to make the face and the walls of the mold separately. That way, when the paraffin solidifies, you just pull this apart and work the paraffin off whichever end it sticks to. This is still a bit finicky. I played around with the method a bit. I tried heating it with a hairdryer to melt it off, or prying it off with a knife. In the end, what worked best for me was just to pry it off carefully. Next, I needed a way to mount the shape to the necklace. For this, I just got some steel rings off Michael's, heated them on a lighter, and stuck them in. Simple as. The next step was to create the breakout molds. This ended up being the bulk of my adventure because of how long it took to create each batch, and the amount of trial and error involved. I didn't expect bubbles to be as big an issue as they were. I ended up buying a vacuum chamber just for this project. Also, I ended up melting 2 of the plastic negatives, but they couldn't produce any paraffin positives without breaking them, so they don't count. The process that ended up working was to mix a cup full of the same 50-50 mix of plaster of Paris and play sand that went into the aluminum furnace. I would mix by hand and keep adding water until I felt it all dissolve, and then I would apply the vacuum. Slowly so that the mix doesn't boil over the container, and then I would pour it into the little paper cups. Put in the paraffin positive face down and apply the vacuum again to suck out any bubbles that this introduced. Then I would keep poking it back down. The paraffin wants to float, but we need to make sure that the metal ring is submerged. After about 10 minutes, it should solidify, and 12 hours later, it's ready to put upside down into the toaster oven and melt out all the paraffin. This process didn't work for the bear paw, though, because the designs were too small, too fine. They would keep trapping in air bubbles and leaving those blank patches all over the mold. What I ended up doing for this was to put it face up in the plaster mix and weigh it down with a piece of aluminum, suck out all of the air, then pull it out and let the surface harden a little bit before putting it face down and making it like the rest of the molds. And after that, hold on a minute. Would you look at that? It's aluminum time. 4 months into the project, making good time. Now it's time to start melting some metal. I melted my cans down to aluminum ingots before I started, and as I was pulling my furnace out, I noticed sharp shards of aluminum sticking off my equipment. See here that the aluminum gets pretty fucking sharp. See if the camera will focus on that. So now's a good time to let everyone know this is a bad idea. You shouldn't try this, and if you hurt yourself doing this, it's not my fault. In the interest of safety, I will go over my equipment. The ear protection is from a gun range, and really not necessary for this. I wore them because they fit comfortably over my Raycon earbuds and allowed me to listen to my music at premium audio quality without any interruption from external noises. By the way, this video is not sponsored by Raycon, nor do I own any of their products. Sunglasses. I am a simp for eye protection, and you should be as well. Always have something between the danger and your eyes. I use sunglasses because it's bright outside, but always have something there, alright? P95 respirator mask. I don't know if this helped at all, and now that I'm vaccinated, I'm really not worried about catching COVID off of my aluminum. Welding gloves. Of course you need these. The temperatures are actually so high that I ruined a pair of welding gloves previously. So everything I do here is using a pair of tongs through the welding gloves. And anything less than that, you're going to melt your skin off. Steel toe boots. I don't know what the standard is when working with hot metal, but I think it's a good idea to have something that's not going to immediately collapse on your foot if you drop something hot and or heavy on it. The process for starting the furnace is going to be familiar to you if you watch the King of Random video. First you add some charcoal, add lighter fluid to taste, and it's going to take about 10 minutes after lighting it up before the fire really gets going. So once you find something to do for the next 10 minutes, light her up. As with the King of Random video, I'm going to be applying an airflow using a hairdryer. I managed to melt my previous hairdryer, so I had to rebuild my setup using some duct tape and some PVC pipe. Using a steel camping cup as a crucible, I loaded in my aluminum, and I put my molds on the rim of the furnace because I thought that the aluminum might cool down too fast on contact with the plaster and might not get into all those details. So to mitigate this, I decided to heat up the molds as well. When the aluminum was nice and melted, I decided to start pouring. I loaded up the next batch, and when the first set started to cool down, I broke it open and wasn't impressed with the results, but I made several copies of each mold because I knew that they weren't all going to work. You need to keep trying to find out what works and what doesn't, so I kept going. And after the next few failures, I thought I could maybe mix, like have some of the molds out of the furnace, some in the furnace, and pour. With my last few molds, I thought maybe it really needs to heat up, so I dipped the mold into the aluminum and held it there for a while. Then I pulled it out and let it cool. That didn't work either. Sorry, I think this wasn't a very well-conceived idea. I'm actually pretty sad about this turnout. This is... Can I get one that works? On the plus side, I don't have to give away any of my precious soda cans. You know, I spent all day on this. And they're all failures. I was starting to realize that I just didn't have the equipment to do this project. I couldn't make aluminum do what I needed it to do. The entire premise of this project was false. With that, it was time to pack up my furnace and go to bed. But I'm not giving up that easy. Sure, after all this time I have nothing, but now I'm 4 months older, and therefore 4 months wiser. So with my more mature brain, let's look at the problem. Well, all the details on these molds came out really soft. Originally I thought this was because the aluminum would cool too fast on contact with the mold. But what if it did get all those details, and then retracted in on itself as it cooled down? I don't have a way to prove that this is what happened, but I was confident enough that I bought a pound of bismuth powder online. Bismuth has two properties that should mitigate this problem. First, it has a much lower melting temperature, and second, it has a lower rate of thermal expansion. While I waited for it to arrive, I decided to buy a more simple setup to melt it down. You can melt bismuth with just a camping stove, so that's what I got. And when the bismuth arrived, I immediately ruined it. So when you melt down bismuth, it tends to gain a layer of oxidation on the surface that you can just scrape off. But when it's a powder, it's all surface area. Maybe I could have mitigated this if I had a way to flood it with nitrogen while melting, but it's too late now. But I'm still not giving up. I'm octupling down 8 pounds of bismuth chunks on Amazon. And this just worked. It was super easy to melt down, and even though it didn't work every time, and I still had to keep making batches of molds, every batch would get at least one success. Sometimes I did have to melt down a failure and re-pour it, but I found that melting it down was super easy, and the steel ring would even float to the surface because bismuth is so dense, and I could just pull it out. And soon I was left with all the models I wanted. They did have a layer of ugly yellow oxidation on the surface, but I could just sandpaper that off, which is a little tedious, but was riding on the high of finally being done. And here's the result. I hope you enjoyed reading this essay as much as I enjoyed writing it. It's been a long journey. I learned a lot about myself, gained a lot of bismuth. I was very heartbroken to find that after 6 hours of melting aluminum, the whole idea was not going to work. And I'm honestly not sure I could have made it to the end of this project if it wasn't for an hour of Raid Shadow Legends ads by YouTuber Wheezy, neither of which is a sponsor of this video, but there is a link in the description. I was actually ended up very nervous when I was pouring the bismuth because I was so afraid it would end up like the aluminum. But bismuth is there for me. It took about 20 minutes total to melt it down and pour it. Very relaxing, actually. Ended up with results that I'm very happy with. Sent them out, and now it's done. So until next time, fuck aluminum.